All right, welcome everyone. This is our final PCNSE preparation session. The last domain is on firewall troubleshooting, so it should be an interesting one. I know there will probably be a lot of stories and experiences that the team has to share. And I think we're going to record this one, so anyone who couldn't make it today can check it out online. I believe I'm sharing the screen. Just back to the PCNSE landing page. And I'm going to just navigate to two places that we usually start with, which is the blueprint and the study guide. And I just wanted to take a quick look at the blueprint and then describe what we were going to walk through today, because there is not enough time to get through all of the content in the study guide or blueprint. So we had a bit of a different plan to hit some of the highlights, so to speak. Okay, so on the screen is the blueprint, and domain 6 is what we're tackling today, the final domain, troubleshooting. And as you can see, there are sections where they break down troubleshooting methodology and steps. Some of them are using common features that probably many customers run in their firewall environment. Others might be a little bit less common. It's going to go to the end and the last little bit on troubleshooting HA. So what we thought we were going to do is actually take a bit of a different approach. We were going to first have Nathaniel talk about understanding the problem, sort of step zero, so to speak, before getting into hunting and looking around on the firewall. Jawad was then going to bring up the demo firewall instance we have access to go through a little bit of a troubleshooting methodology, so to speak. And Mohammed was going to pitch in on highlighting some of the routing elements there. We were then going to go to Paul, who I believe, if everything worked out, Paul, you were going to get a firewall up in AWS and show us some deeper elements around packet captures and some of the key elements from the command line. So without further ado, I think I will stop sharing, and we might as well. And I think some of the team members we have on the call today have a hard stop at 12:30, I think. So we'll do our best to fit with this within the hour. But with that being said, I'm going to pass it over to you, Nathaniel, to talk a little bit about gathering information and understanding the problem.
Thanks, Stefan.
Yeah.
I don't have anything to share out, so I'll just talk. I hope that's okay.
Sounds great.
But yeah, okay. So pretty much what I want to talk about is just, I suppose it could be considered the most important part of solving a problem is having the information that you need. Getting the proper information from the user or person experiencing the issue is going to determine if the issue will take a day to solve or a week or more to solve, because it can save a lot of time just you figuring out what the issue is and having all the information to plug into the resources that you have in order to dig into the issue. So
Right.
the most important part to know is what the issue is. So talk to if it's an issue yourself, that's easy. You just know what's happening. But if it's someone else, you have to ask them what is wrong, what is the expected behavior. Once you know that, then things usually start to fall into place right away. You can then branch off into figuring out like what devices are affected by the issue. Is it one device, multiple devices? You can ask for source and destination addresses. And sometimes it can be a whole subnet. So it's source subnet, source or destination subnet. Moving on from that, it continues to like, when did the issue appear? I guess would be the next thing that you'd probably ask for. Is it a random time that the issue happens, or is it a certain start time where it started and now it's continuing on? That usually helps determine if it was caused by a change someone made on the firewall or on another side of things. Yeah, and if it's reoccurring, And if it's random, then that'll help you sort of figure out, going back, you can get some timestamps and sort of plug that into the firewall to see if any traffic lines up with that or any other anomalies. For the next thing that is probably most important to gather is, if it's applicable, the ports and applications being affected. If it's a specific application, such as let's say RDP, that would be important to know. You can plug that into the firewall and sort of know the port numbers related to that. It'll help just narrow down the search results. And then I would say another thing that is definitely important is, can the issue be recreated? If it's a random issue, if it's not a start and it's just reoccurring all the time, being able to recreate the issue can really help with the investigation and say, rule out some of the firewall issues. And obviously, having someone that is experiencing the issue on like a call or have contact with them, being able to test things, run packet captures on the destination device, and even running packet captures on the firewall can help shed some light on to the issue itself. So those are the primary things that I look for when I am investigating an issue. Obviously, there's more things that are related to different protocols and issues that are specific, but those are the basics, and I'd say that's what's most important before you dive into something.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you, Nathaniel. I think it's sort of I think it feels like the right thing to do is just start getting into the firewall and start looking around and seeing if you can find anything that looks like it might be related to an issue, but it's often faster to stop, gather that information you were talking about, so you can focus your analysis to whether it be source and destination filters in traffic logs at a specific period of time or in another specific domain. So yeah, you guys brought that step up, and that was a good one. Thank you for running us through some of those highlights, Nathaniel.
Yeah, just gathering everything at once right at the beginning saves time later, because usually when the issue appears, people are available, right? You have the resources you need, the people to contact to gather that information, and then you don't have to jump back and forth and sort of stop what you're doing in order to pull people away or jump on machines to get the information that you missed.
Yeah, and often sometimes the user or people not administering the firewall won't realize that in some cases having the issue recreated while you're looking at the firewall can just save a lot of time. You can focus your troubleshooting steps into a specific area and get to resolution a lot quicker.
Definitely.
All right. Yeah. Thank you, Nathaniel. All right, Jawad, if we'll pass it over to you to maybe to bring up the demo firewall, and we're going to start just showcasing a little bit of a methodology. I know the team will probably jump in here as well, but we have an issue. We've been given some information. Let's open up that firewall, Jawad, and maybe hit on some highlights for people to see what are key elements to take a look at.
Yeah, sounds good. Let me know if you guys can see my screen with the demo box.
We can.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I'll start by saying that with Palo Alto, as we've seen before, like I would say 99% of the configuration can be done through the GUI. And then when we talk about troubleshooting, I would say, again, 80 to 90% of basic troubleshooting can also be done through the GUI, which is a nice thing. For advanced troubleshooting, of course, there's CLI, which we'll talk about. So there's a lot of also commands we can use on the CLI for that. So assuming we've set up logging, we set up log forwarding, if we're using Panorama, everything is set up correctly, just jump on the box. In this case, I'm just using the firewall demo box. And the first place to go to for troubleshooting would be the Monitor tab. So under the Monitor tab, we have the different logs types, depending what's the issue we're troubleshooting, assuming we collected all the information like Nathaniel mentioned. Traffic logs usually is a good start if we're looking just to see if something is blocked, or a server to host communication is not working. Traffic logs is usually a good start. If we're trying to look or troubleshoot for threats or something we suspect is being blocked by threat profiles, then we would go to threat logs. If it's a web traffic, a user is complaining about access to a specific website, then it's URL logs. And if it's a specific file that's being blocked or having an issue, then it's data logs. Now, with the recent PCNOS version, the nice thing is they have added unified logs, which would give a comprehensive logging. So all the traffic, threat, data, URL can be seen from the unified logging here. So also a good place to start. If we're not sure what is the issue is, we can start with unified. Usually you have a source destination address. By clicking on just an IP here, it will add it to the filter. And then you can enter your specific source IP, same thing with the destination. And then you can filter by clicking specifically to see the sessions between the source and destination. So by default, there's specific columns that are available in the logs. The main ones I would look at is, the first one I would look at is the action to see if something is being denied or blocked or dropped. So the action is important. Application and port, just to understand like what's the application, if there's application shift happening, we talked about that previously. Of course, source zone, destination zone, source interface, destination interface to make sure routing is happening properly. And then NAT IPs in case it's, going to the internet, want to make sure it's being NAT, or it's an inbound traffic, it's make sure it's being NATed to the right addresses, etc. In addition, you can click here and add other columns if required to see additional things or additional data. One of usually also that we look at is the bytes received, bytes sent. So if we're seeing traffic being allowed, for example, and we're seeing bytes being sent out, but no bytes received, that's usually an indication that it's not an issue with the Palos, but maybe it's an issue with routing, or the uplink router, or other devices in play that are not returning the traffic properly to the Palo. Yeah, and then if you identify from unified it's being blocked through security profiles, then you can go to the threat logs, and usually these columns here are customized or specific to threat logs. And then you can identify if it's, for example, a vulnerability or a virus or something else, and get more details on what's happening. If it's URL, then maybe it's being blocked as a URL category that you have it set to block that category, or it's a custom URL being applying a block action on certain URLs. Okay, so yeah, generally this is a good starting point to understand, if something is being denied by policies, or if it's, an issue with routing, or it's being blocked by URLs or security profiles. Beyond that, if it's a decryption issue related to decryption, then we have the decryption logs, very useful. So in traffic logs, there is a decrypted column. I'll add that if it's not added here.
Looks like it is there, Jawad.
It is?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes. So
Yeah.
usually this is the first place to determine if this session or this traffic is being decrypted. So if we see yes here, that means that session is decrypted. So the next place I would go to troubleshoot additional things on related to decryption would be the decryption logs. Very useful. Again, this has been added in the PCNSE 10 and makes it very easy to troubleshoot decryption or decrypted related issues. In the decryption logs, we have the application, of course. We have the policy, decryption policy that session is hitting. So we know, for example, this traffic is hitting decryption HTTP2 policy. And then you have all the details about the certs that are being used or identified through this session, and then TLS version and all the encryption algorithms and etc. And most importantly, I would look at the error column. This usually will provide details about the type of error or what's causing the error. Very commonly, we talked about, I think previously, and the decryption session would be like certificate errors. Like, for example, the firewall doesn't have the cert chain or doesn't identify the issuer and things like that. In this case, you'll probably need to either decide to add the missing cert so the firewall can trust it, or you might say, no, this is an untrusted site. I want to continue to block it, or you might decide to whitelist it to allow this. And there's other error types usually related to decryption that you will easily identify this error through this column. Let's see what next we've got.
While you're looking, Jawad, one question I had. I know some aspects of zone protection profiles are logged. That would show up in the unified log as well, then?
Yeah, zone protection logs are part of the threat logs here. So we've got the three types: the flood protection, the reconnaissance, which is scanning, and the packet protection. So the type would be, if you want to specifically look for zone protection logs, you would filter on type flood or scan or packet, and then that will show you the logs or sessions triggered by zone protection profiles. You could also see it from the unified logs. One thing I missed to talk about is in the traffic logs, very important, is the session end reason. The session end reason usually will provide also an indication of what happened to the session. Was it reset from the server, from the host? Did it age out? If it's a deny, it's going to show a policy deny. If it's a threat or if it's a session that was, scanned and then a threat was identified and blocked by threat, it's going to show as threat session end reason. And then there's few session end reasons related to decryption as well. Decrypt error, decrypt end session. So that will kind of guide you where to look further depending on the session end reason as well. Very helpful when troubleshooting.
And I know you guys mentioned in an earlier session some applications, especially when the security policy is set to log at session end, may just not have ended and not have generated a log. And in that case, the session browser would be the place to check, right, Jawad?
Yes. Anything we're seeing here is a session that has ended, and the firewall logged basically have a log for it. If we're talking about active sessions, we're troubleshooting an ongoing active session, then the go place for that would be the session browser from the GUI. And the session browser is showing all the established current sessions. And then same thing, you can filter on by source IP, destination IP, or other basically criteria is added to the filter, and then search for that specific session. Also, when we click on the plus here, whether from the logs, traffic logs, or the session browser, it usually provides additional information about that session. The type of the session and the source destination port and other things as well that might be useful for troubleshooting.
Yeah.
In case of threats, that's usually also helpful if you've enabled packet capture through these security profiles or threat profiles. You can also see those on the session by clicking on this down arrow here, and it'll show the packet captures. Again, helpful when you're trying to troubleshoot in relation to those signatures or vulnerabilities, etc. I'm not sure if I missed anything on that first section there.
Think so, Jawad. Yeah. Wanted to look at the unified traffic log. Yeah. Application, session and reason. Ingress, egress interface. Yeah, I think you did do a good job of a walkthrough. It really highlights the whole point of at least having a session or a specific source and destination helps narrow in the focus. As you can see, how you can quite easily filter whether it's a log or what's actively allowed as a session through the firewall.
Yep. Next, do we want to talk about routing, I guess? Or
Yeah,
IPsec tunnels?
I think those were the two we maybe had to pivot to the study guide for, right, Jawad? Yeah.
The IPsec tunnels, we can still show some stuff here if needed.
Okay.
Routing, yeah,
Good.
unfortunately, doesn't show on the demo box.
And I'll put a link in because the study guide, starting on page 208, actually has a really good sequence of troubleshooting steps for phase 1 and phase 2 IPsec issues.
Yeah, want to start with IPsec?
Sure, that sounds good, Jawad.
Yeah, I could start over it, and then Muhammad, you can fill in the items there. So yeah, understanding, the two phases with IPsec will help with troubleshooting issues there. So the initial IKE phase 1 is basically happening between the two physical IPs. So making sure that we're allowing the pings and the IKE servers. That's basically where we look first if there's issues with IKE phase 1. Otherwise, there's the pre-shared key that's being exchanged in that phase, or a certificate, depending how it's configured, and then the different encryption algorithms. So making sure everything is matching on the IKE phase 1. Once that's established, then it's gonna basically move into IKE phase 2, which again, there's algorithms that are exchanged. And this is where we've got the tunnel interface, the logical interface, and we might have tunnel monitoring as well. So basically, yeah, understanding, different phases will help basically with troubleshooting the issues. First place to look at for errors on IPsec tunnels would be the system logs. Going back to the starting with the GUI again, the first place to check would be the system logs, and then you can specify the type as VPN, I think, and then usually you'll see if there's errors with you'll see it in the description. The description will provide some information about the error, whether it's related to mismatch algorithms or the mismatch key or other things. Beyond that, there's a lot of commands. I think you had it in the link there to troubleshoot more on the IPsec from the command lines. I'll let Mohammed if you want to add anything there.
No, yeah, I think you covered it all. The one thing I did notice, if you are, sure that both sides are, compatible and they're negotiating fine, and your system logs are empty, you don't see anything in there. The one thing that helped in the past is, by restarting the IKE manager on the Palo Alto, that kicks in. It's similar to like management plane restart. It's a good idea to just restart your IKE manager as well. That will just, reinitiate all the IPsec tunnels. So that's the last resort if you don't see anything on your system logs as well. Yeah.
And the one thing also to mention is the type of IPsec tunnel. The Palo Alto is route based. Some other firewall vendors are policy based. So if you're if you're doing IPsec tunnel, let's say with a Cisco, for example, which is again a policy-based tunnel, then there's some additional consideration there using the proxy IDs in the IPsec tunnels. If those are not configured, then probably that IPsec tunnel will not establish successfully. So then you add the specific networks that are involved in that IPsec tunnel as proxy IDs under this setting here. So just remember that in case it's an IPsec tunnel with a different firewall vendor.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I guess generally speaking, people are going to run into when setting up a new IPsec VPN, there might be a lot of analysis on the setup stage and troubleshooting that. But if it's been running and nothing's been touched, it might be more of the steps you outlined, Mohammed, on resetting things for whatever reason. Could have gotten to a state where a reset's needed at times and things like that. And I know the study guide also mentions the test commands. I think those are another command to sort of force start either phase 1 or phase 2.
Exactly.
Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah, and I'll mention lastly, the GUI will show the IKE, the phase 1 and phase 2.
Right.
If it's green, it's like the status visually here. If it's green or red, also that's a quick check to see if it's up or down as well.
Right, that's a good point, Jawad. Yes, so at a glance, you can come here and see if one of those phases are down or not up for some reason.
Yep.
Yep, there's a lot with, I know those IPsec VPNs, there's a lot of parameters and a lot of steps. I know that can be quite tricky to set up, especially between different vendors.
Okay, routing is next.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, we can't show it on the demo box, but very helpful when troubleshooting routing issues is the runtime stats, which basically displays the routing table and the forwarding table. So it will have all the summary of the routes in there, and the routes learned from statically or through dynamic routing protocols like OSPF or BGP. The routing table will have all the summary of all routes learned from different protocols, but then the forwarding table will have like the best selected route. So yeah, like troubleshooting routing, and I'll let Muhammad, he's probably have things to add there. Start from there, see if the route is, being learned, how it's being learned, the metric. Trace route usually is helpful also to see what kind of pass is happening between a source and destination. And yeah, again, from routing table, you'll be able to tell if things are being learned properly, if neighborhood is being established, let's say on SPF or BGP, and things like that.
Yeah, yeah, it's a bummer that the demo firewalls do not have that virtual router. They want to hide their routing table from us. However, luckily, while you were speaking, Jawad, I was able to spin up an empty firewall, so I can share my screen and show some runtime stats on a blank box. We might not be able to see a lot, but still a little bit helpful here.
At least where it is and all of that.
Exactly.
You guys can just like configure firewalls on the fly, just like shooting from the hip. Just spin up a Palo Alto over here. Paul did the same thing.
Okay. So basically from here, what Jawad was alluding to, under the network virtual routers, these are your virtual routers. So you can obviously add more virtual routers here. Palo Alto comes with the default virtual routers. So let's talk about this. So if you click on more runtime stats, so before we go in more runtime stats, this picture probably gives you the entire routing table history there. So you have RIP, OSPF, version 3, BGP, and multicast. So in here, I just quickly went ahead and configured OSPF. And as you can see, it's enabled. I have one area count, one subnet, but no neighborship counts here. To dig a little bit more deeper, this is your actual routing table. So you will see under the routing table, you'll have, I suppose if I want to go into the main global routing table, you'll see route table here, which is your RIB. So you should see all the routes that are established from Palo Alto. You'll see them here, regardless if they're redundant or not. This is your entire routing table. Then, but on your forwarding table, you'll see the best available path here. Similarly, with the RIP, I don't know who uses RIP nowadays, but all the RIP information will be here. On the OSPF side, more detailed information, your summaries, any of the areas you have configured, the interfaces within the route table, and all the neighbors here. From a troubleshooting standpoint, obviously, if you're troubleshooting BGP, just the most common thing we encounter is BGP runs on TCP 179 to make sure that it is not blocked by any intermediate firewall. That's the most common thing we've seen if Palo Alto is terminating your BGP connection, right? But if Palo Alto is in the middle of the two BGP peers, make sure you have a firewall rule that allows that connection, especially if the firewall is running in vWire mode. Right. Yeah, so that's from a troubleshooting standpoint. Same thing with OSPF as well. Ensure that both your neighbors are in an active state. You're not in a passive state. So otherwise, you'll if you're not receiving any hello packets and the other side is on passive, obviously the neighborship will not come up.
Right.
Touching a little bit on redistribute profiles. This is where you'll come and set up your redistribution. For testing, I just configured one as just to show if I want to, redistribute any of my connected routes. I'll just click this connect button and make sure this is by default, it's no redistribution for some reason, but for always double check and make sure it's redistributed. Click OK, come back to your OSPF. Oh, sorry, not here. Under export rules, and redistribute all those routes here. And then any redistribution routes coming into Palo Alto, you'll be able to see them same under your routing table. yeah, basically that's about it.
Yeah.
And I was just going to ask you guys that there must be log events. If it's a log event related to a routing protocol, would that show up under the system log?
Again, yeah, that will
Right.
be system
Okay.
logs, exactly.
Right.
If you're seeing, I'll add lastly, if you're seeing a route that's not behaving as expected, always check policy-based forwarding, which overrides.
Right.
You can override basically the routing tables by adding a policy-based forward rule. Less commonly used these days, but there's still use cases for using PBF rules, like
Yeah,
Very good
that's a
point.
multiple
good point.
ISPs.
Yeah, very good point, Jawad. Yeah, and that's you will configure it under policies, policy-based forwarding, and as you're mentioning, Jawad, this definitely overrides your routing table. Yeah.
If it hits a policy-based forwarding rule, can you see that in like the session browser as a flag or anything? Or do you guys know of any way, if you're say looking at a session, that you could find if it hit a policy-based forwarding rule? It's an off-the-cuff question.
Yeah, I don't think under the monitor or anything like that, but obviously
Okay.
if there are policy-based rules, you'll see the counters increase if it's being
Right.
hit. But any
Right.
active route, or you won't be able to see if it's coming from a global routing table or a policy-based route.
Right.
The only way I've seen is I look at like the session and the zone or the exit or the egress interface doesn't align with what I know for what it should be going to. That's
It's not going where it should be going, and then it might be
and then
like
I
a
look at
rule
policy
here.
forwarding.
Yeah.
Exactly.
No, that's a very good point. Thanks for adding that, Jawad.
Yeah.
One thing to maybe add on, guys, under the monitor tab, have you guys looked at like the magnifying glass blown out view? I don't know if we touched on that.
Like just to look at all the parameters of the log versus what's
so
set
you
up
can
in the
add
columns.
you can add columns to that monitor tab, but you know what, I'll do it. Yeah, exactly. And then often I know this one goes underutilized, is just that view to look at a specific session. So if you finally track down your session you're looking for and you want to see all the information without having to make sure you have the column selected, or click that button and you'll get the full view and sometimes even more information.
Right. Because is that, I know at one point, if you did that on the unified log, does it show which logs were related to on that view?
On this one, it will, like on the bottom section there, where it says receive time and all that. If there's a threat, for example, it's related, it would actually show up here as a second line item underneath it.
Right. Oh, okay. And wherever you're looking at it, that's interesting.
But I find this is somewhat underutilized. Sometimes it can sort of reveal some information that isn't available in the columns that you have selected on the traffic view.
Yes. Good
Exactly.
point. Yeah.
In this case, you got some nice SD-WAN stuff going on there with cluster 1 and everything.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I think these demo boxes, they're tap mode plus SD-WAN on it. So not bad. That's why they want to hide their routing table. If they
because it's probably feeling a little too much there.
Exactly. Yeah. All right.
Awesome. Thank you, Mohammed. Thank you, Jawad. I think, are we at the point, Paul, where we pass it over to you to see,
talk about
to go
captures.
into the rabbit hole a little bit deeper?
Happy to. Let me pull a few things on screen and okay. So as Stefan mentioned, I stood up an AWS firewall, which we talked about in the first session. For some troubleshooting actually outside this, and then I've reverted the config back, so it's a little bit cleaner right now than what I had going. And so this is the firewall itself. And then I've got a GlobalTech portal hooked up where I've also got my my client connected to it. And since it's on another screen there, I'll just show you. Let's just do this. Let's go. Yeah, I've got my interface here, my PAN virtual adapter connected. What we're going to be talking about is packet captures. So first and foremost, you've done your look through, and this is kind of assuming you've gone through all these other stages. Packet capture kind of comes near the end, and sometimes is a great tool to sort of get to the ground truth. As we like to say, the packet captures or the captures never seem to lie as long as you capture everything. The network doesn't really lie when you look at a packet capture, and this is kind of a commonplace for a lot of tools to get to if you're doing troubleshooting. So if you're familiar with other products and you're trying to transfer that knowledge over, sometimes a packet capture can be a great way to look at it. We're also going to be talking about something called Flow Basic, which generally I find in the documentation is recommended that you have engaged TAC at that point. So, you know, mileage may vary. We find it very useful to figure out what's going on in the Palo Alto because there's a lot of functionality and a lot of different features. So we'll talk about Flow Basic too. So you've done your analysis. You've looked at your 5 tuples. You found the session that you're concerned about. There doesn't seem to be any reason why you think it's being blocked or dropped. None of the quick hits sort of get you to the solution. It's not threat or session end reason threat. Maybe it's client TCP fin or it's client reset, but you don't see any reason why it would be doing that. You've got full session. Your bytes out. Your SIM, for example, your 50 or 80 bytes going out, and you've got bytes coming back, right? So you've got a full TCP session. There's no session end reason, including things like incomplete or what are some of the other ones there? Anyway, those applications,
the different ends. Yeah.
Well, think about the applications that are specific to kind of broken sessions, things like incomplete or not enough data or things like that.
Right.
Non-SYN TCP. You've gone through that session and it seems like everything's correct. No resets, no actions, no drops, no packets that seem wrong. So the next thing to do would be do a packet capture. And so there's a functionality under the monitor tab here, packet capture. And you have this interface in order to do a packet capture. So we're going to set up a simple packet capture here. IDs 1 to 4. It's a little limiting. That is something that I've run into problems with just how many filters you can put in, but this is the limit that there's 4 different IDs you can apply, and the sources and destinations have to basically be either 32s or 0000. So you can't put in something like a /24 or something like that. So,
I didn't know that. Yeah.
Well, I'll show you what I mean. I've run into issues where we don't quite get that. Or
yes,
just
this gets distilled down to hardware, probably, right? So it's a limited set. And just to add, which is probably not advised, Paul, you could just turn on packet capture and it would capture everything on the box and it'll let you do that, right? Which is not a wise idea. So the filters you're going through like a good step to always do just
I'm
do it safely.
Jumping a little bit here. So just to talk about the Swiss 24 thing is it says, if you try to do it, it'll stop you and say source blah, 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 blah is invalid. Address must be a /32 or without a subnet mask, right? So basically like /32 or nothing. But yeah, going back one step, Steph, thank you. You can just turn packet capture on and it'll just start capturing everything. So maybe we'll start from there. So what is the bare minimum to get a packet capture going? You have to apply stages. So when the packet goes through the firewall, it goes through multiple different stages. Those stages are receive for when the packet hits the original interface. And typically I call that RX. Then it's inside the firewall, which is called the firewall stage. This includes things like loopback interfaces and some other internal logic that might occur. I typically call that FW for the firewall stage. And then you also have the transmit stage, which, when you're sending a packet out or you're egressing the interface from the Palo. And I typically call that TX or transmit. And then there's one other stage, which is the most important to what we're dealing with right now for troubleshooting, is the drop stage. Anything that hits the drop stage has been dropped by the Palo, whether the Palo receives a packet, doesn't like the packet, because let's say it's a malicious action or it determines it's a malicious action, it'll drop that packet and then it'll send a reset packet. So in your transmit stage, you'll find a reset. In your receive stage, you'll see how the session stands up and everything. And the drop stage, you'll see that packet that it didn't like that it drops. This is typically what gets sent into that packet capture mode when you do a simple packet capture as part of what Jawad was showing when you can download it. So this, I typically call DR for drop stage. If you turn all these on and you turn on packet capture, it will warn you, just as Steph was sort of saying, packet capture without a filter will cause all traffic to be captured. This can cause system performance to degrade drastically. There's some things that occur when packet captures happen, like hardware offloading, where it can't take some fast path sort of activities because it needs to sort of do packet captures on the traffic. And so we typically apply a filter. I'll pause here just for a minute to talk about the 2 different packet captures that exist. There is a packet captures are all for data plane interfaces. So in my network interface components, you can see I've got a few interfaces. I guess one, basically it's a public external interface in AWS. So it has this private IP that's attached to a public IP. This is what it's going to be capturing. Now there is another interface that's not shown in this. That's a management plane interface. And for that, you would have to do a management PCAP, which is using, somebody help me out here.
Is it via the command line, Paul?
Yeah, it's
TCP
right.
dump.
MP log.
I think
TCP
Say
Todd
again?
said it.
It
TCP
was
dump.
MP log, right?
TCP dump. It's TCP dump. Yeah. Thank you, Jawad. So we'll jump to that too. So basically, there's two packet captures. If you're trying to capture management plane stuff, for example, your Palo Alto reaching out to the internet through the management interface, or it's trying to reach out to an LDAP server or something, and there's a problem there, you're going to be wanting to go to the CLI and do a TCP dump. It is actually TCP dump, like the program TCP dump from like the Linux world. So it's just kind of a wrapper around that functionality. You can do TCP dumps for management plane. That will not capture data plane interfaces, just like this capture I'm showing you now will not capture management plane interface. So
Right.
Back to monitor tab, you've applied your stages. So now you got the packet flow. You can click on packet capture and you could say, okay, and you'll start capturing. I'm going to apply a filter here. And so this is a pre-filter, right? It will filter the traffic before it hits those stages. And you have those 4 IDs. You can do it by interface, source, destination, ports, and protocols. You can also choose non-IP, which is a little rarer, but you can capture those too. Basically anything on the data plane interfaces.
Yeah.
So for source, I'm going to say
I would just add that on the non-IP, I think it's a good idea when you're trying to capture any ARPs. This is where you're going to come back and say, yeah, it's a non-IP. I want to capture ARP packets.
Right.
absolutely. Yeah. I'm thinking I don't want to get something to the capture, and I'm just thinking if I limit it, I'll have to basically limit it to my public IP. Okay. Give me 1 second. I'm just going to curl.
And while you're doing that, Paul, you guys haven't, like, generally it's safe, generally speaking, if you use a filter to packet capture. You guys don't run into scenarios where there's degradation or operational issues as long as you create a packet filter.
Yes.
Yeah.
I haven't run into the degradation or issues like that. No, I haven't run into any issues as long as you apply filters. I don't think I've even run into issues where I don't apply filters, but to be honest, I don't do that commonly.
Right.
And the boxes that I've done that on, it's very, very small test sort of boxes. So apply filters. You don't want to degrade the system while doing the packet capture. And also you don't want to run these for too long, right? Like we've left them on sometimes for days to try to capture an issue that is maybe non-recreatable, right? That occurs kind of somewhat randomly. But I will go in and try to wipe the filters out and recreate those just so that the packet capture sizes stay small. There is limited space on the box, and you don't want to get into situations where like you're capping out the the disk size basically, or the disk on the boxes.
I want to also give you just a time check, Paul, because I think you have a hard stop, don't you? Unless I'm wrong with your next meeting.
Yeah, I think you're right. So I'm gonna actually apply a blank filter, which is basically gonna be 0, 0 to 0, 0, just for the sake of the fact this is a very clean box. It's very
test
small,
box.
nothing's occurring on it. Yeah.
Yeah.
You turn packet capture on, you say okay, it'll have a different troubleshoot that says it when you don't apply filters, or when you do apply filters, I should say. And then when you refresh it, either with this button or the entire page, you'll start to see captures on the other side there when they execute functions. One function I can, so hopefully I'll just sort of hit this box a little bit with something, and you'll see firewall reset and transmit, nothing's being dropped. If you see a drop stage show up though, this is when we go into this next part. If you see a drop stage show up, the firewall has taken an action and it's dropped a packet. Now, how can you determine why that packet got dropped? Why did it end up in the drop stage is commonly the next question. One way to do that is to look at the global counters, and we'll take a look at that, and then also a flow basic analysis. So hopefully I can run through this really quick. I'm going to turn packet capture off here for a minute, and I'm just going to SSH to the device.
And that would be, just throwing that out while you're doing that, Paul, flow basic would be like a debug in the Cisco world.
Yeah.
Or something similar. Yeah.
Yeah, so what is flow basic? Flow basic is actually a feature on a debug capture. There's many features that can be applied when you're doing a debug capture, and I'll show you these. So in the command, we're going to go to debug, data plane, packet diag, where all of the functionality for packet capture is located. This functionality is not located in the GUI. It's only located in the CLI. So when you're in here and you go show setting, you're going to see basically the settings that have been applied to your packet capture currently. So you can see here I've got like a 0000 filter applied. You can see the logging is currently not enabled. Logging is a debug log. It is a text-based log of what is occurring on the box while it does it. This functionality is not available in the GUI. The packet capture stuff is, though. You can see it's got enabled no, and it has some the stage receive filters and everything I set up. It even has some stuff there. So if you want, you can turn on features of this. You can set log on, or we can set features. So we're going to set a log feature, and then what features are available include all of these. And the one we use most commonly is actually Flow Basic. This does a debug text log breakdown of what actions it's taking while that happens. Now, they're actually independent. You can create a log and not create a capture, but typically we create a capture and a log at the same time. That way we can see the capture occur, we can see the drop stage occur, and then we can look at the log in relation synchronized by tick actually to that file. So let's apply a Flow Basic set, and then what we'll do is we'll just look at those commands again, show setting, sorry, no S. And you can see here now you have logging still not enabled, but you can see a sync log by tick is yes, and you can see the feature Flow Basic enabled. That's just the command I did.
Right.
Now you could actually turn it on with a set log on, and now packet logging is enabled. I'm also going to go set capture on, which is going to turn on the packet capture component. And then if I do a show setting, you can now see that we have logging enabled and we have packet capture enabled. Now it is synchronized, so if I go here and refresh this, you should see that I've actually got packet capture enabled in the GUI now. So they are tied, right? Anyway, we're doing a Flow Basic capture right now with packet captures also enabled. So we're going to generate some traffic, ideally the problem traffic, right? Oh no, something got dropped, right? And then you're going to go back here and you're going to kill that logging and that capture. So typically set capture off and then set log off, which is again the logging component. And then finally, you need to actually look at this text. So how do you find these texts, this log file? Well, you do an aggregate log. So packet diag aggregate logs. You let that run for a bit. It takes time dependent on how long that capture is running for. So definitely, if you can, make those shorter. I've seen this run for sometimes 5 to 10 minutes, but it's not terrible, but it does sometimes take some time if you've got a long capture there. And again, I'll refresh the GUI here just so you can see that the capture is now off because I've turned it off by the CLI. And now you can look at them. So where is it located? Well, it tells you right here, pan packet diag log is aggregated. So we do that with the less command. MP-log stands for management plane logs. So less MP log, pan packet diag, and packet diag. And I'm using lots of tab to autocomplete just so I can't spell something wrong and get a command wrong. So this is your Flow Basic feature enabled log debug file. And what this does is it goes through all of the stages of ingress and egress of that interface with the Flow Basic feature turned on, which means it's logging all those packets as it comes in. So I've got lots of good data here to basically go through, and I'm looking for maybe something that's a little bit more networky based. Okay, here, this is common to what we see a lot of the time. You can see here's a packet received at fast pass stage. It's got the packet breakdown, including a public IP I'm on right now, and like what it's actually hitting. And then just underneath this sort of packet decode dump, it ends up explaining exactly what it's trying to do. It goes through, hey, I found a NAT policy for this. I'm going to apply NAT policy ID 8, right? I found a route table. And so this is really good information, this sort of like section, to really understand what the file is doing as far as actions in the back end. You can see in this piece, it ended up transmitting the packet size 160 on port 16. And you can take these IDs and run them back into like commands to find what that meant. So often in the log, you'll find IDs like virtual router ID 2. It won't tell you the virtual router name. You have to do some alignment there to find out what that router is called. But you can do that with show virtual routers and things like that. So yeah, this is a breakdown. It will take every stage, ingress, egress, transmits, receive. And the best part is when there's a drop that occurs, it'll tell you why. It'll say things like, hit DOS limit of packet dropped. And so you can go through this, which can be very large in size and somewhat complex to go through, which is why I think they recommend that TAC gets involved at this point. But you can go through this and really analyze every stage of that packet as it flows through, every feature it goes through, every function it chooses. Very, very useful. And then obviously, I would only look at this if I was troubleshooting something when I found a drop stage here, a stage that showed up with DR, right? I want to find out why that dropped. That's where I go to. But this is a very good ground truth. The only other thing I wanted to show on the CLI was the find command. So earlier today, I was having a call with Jawad, and we were looking for a command. We didn't know if it existed or not. I just thought I would show that off. So on the CLI, find command keyword followed by whatever keyword you're searching for. So let's say,
oh, that's neat.
Packet, right? If you click enter, it's going to list all of the commands that have that keyword
very cool.
in it. I've found this to be very useful. One, it's always up to date because it comes directly from the Pan OS. It does not need internet access or anything. I've also found functions, features, tools in here that are not in documentation. So if you're ever curious about like, hey, I got to do something with OSPF, right? OSPF. And then boom, here's your everything that has OSPF as a keyword in it, including show, clear, debug, whatever. So I thought I would just show that command off as well. Find command has been very helpful for me to find functionality that I needed, or I just forget, right? I'm on the CLI, I need to, how do I do that again? Find command has always been helpful for me.
Could you run one and show all the test commands, Paul? Does it?
Sure.
You can search any part of a keyword.
Yeah. So you can see test comes up with self-test. Like there's actually some request system
there's
self-test
other parameters.
Jobs, I didn't know, but there's also some user ID tests you can do. And if I go through here, you can see it starts to get into like the test commands: test HTTP profile, test UID, test wildfire, test CP server.
That's very neat.
SAML.
The tip of the day. Nice one.
Yeah, this one I found an undocumented function which was critical to solving a problem for me previously. So there's a find command for you.
Cool.
And then also on the CLI, since we're just here, use tab autocomplete. Test, double click tab, you're going to get all the commands that are there. It's very interactive, and it even explains sort of what that stuff is. So if I want to get to test routing, you can really go through all that stuff. Anyway, yeah, cool. I'll leave it there.
Awesome.
Is there anything else in the packet piece I'm missing? Oh, I was going to talk about client-side capture a little bit. So we talked about look for drop stage. If the drop stage is there, turn a flow basic on, find out what packet's being dropped. Run GLB counters. So something else is global counters. Show counters. Sorry, I always get this counter global. What is global counters? Well, every time a function kind of happens, it ticks these counters up in the Palo. And you can actually filter these not only on time from last time you ran, which is called delta, so delta yes, but also the packet filter. And you can see here it says counters for packet that match the debug filter. That's the filter I applied here. So if I wanted to do a packet filter yes and show global counter, I can see that my, so I'll do this again, delta yes. You can see there's 0 rates of all of these. If I go and hit this now, because I'm coming from my filter, which is being applied. Actually, the filter is quite wide, right? 0, 0, I forgot about that. So this is all traffic. You can see that these are the counters that apply to just that time difference between when I ran it last and ran it again, and that's the delta yes. And the packet filter yes is applying really a 0, 0 to 0, 0, so it's a very loose filter right now. But in a troubleshooting situation, if you don't want to go through that big, long flow basic, but you have everything turned on, you've got your captures turned on, you've got your filter turned on, consider hitting this filter yes, and you'll be able to see, oh, did it get dropped? Was there a packet sent, packets received? Was it allocated? Was it not allocated? Was the session discarded? There's even sometimes here things for like the threats or any sort of drop stage that would occur. DOS, protections, it's all in here too. Awesome. Now I'm going to check my schedule because I think I got to jump stuff, but that's all I've got.
I think you do, Paul. Yeah, you did a wonderful job though. There's a lot there. Thank you guys for really hitting on just a fraction of the troubleshooting content, but I feel like it was really purposeful and very typical on what you would run through in troubleshooting some event on the Palo Alto firewall. So I know Paul had to jump now, but unless there's any other questions that you guys have or comments, we could probably wrap up this session. Awesome. It's Friday when we're recording this, so happy Friday to everyone. Thank you guys for all participating. This is the end of the series, so it was great to sort of digest this together as a team and the PCNSE content. If there's any questions that you have For anyone watching after the fact, also don't hesitate to reach out to us. But we'll leave it at that. Thanks, everyone. Have a good day.